Thank everyone for coming in for our projections on September 7th. We've got a terrific lineup. Let me thank our sponsors, which is Archive Magazine, Epson, Photo Daily, American Photography, and Photo Shelter. You should also know the week of September 19th through the 22nd, we're doing another week on covering the Ukraine-Russian war, and we'll have some terrific world-renowned photojournalists who will be presenting their work. Also, I ask everyone to subscribe to our YouTube page at Projections NYC. Thank you very much for that. And tonight we have Clare Perry and Viktor Koen, who will be presenting first. So Viktor, it's all yours. I appreciate everyone coming in. Thanks.
Great to see everyone. It's a really nice change from this uncomfortable quiet that you get before a presentation to get to meet everyone, to see everyone's faces. So projections. I will give a little bit of context and a little bit of continuity of my my schooling, and maybe that will explain a little bit about the work that I do right now. I put this slide in to prove that I used to know how to draw. So I went through very classical academic drawing and painting that I studied in Greece and mostly in Athens. So it doesn't get any more classical than this. And then after 4 years of my BFA in graphic design in the Bezalel Academy of Arts and Design in Jerusalem, and the MFA of illustration at the School of Visual Arts, you get this very kind of structured way to use your thinking and document it and start pushing your concept. So from this free and classical drawing, you get into this very organized way to develop your concepts. This was my thesis project for my BFA. Computers just started coming into our lives, and it's one of the first experiments that I did with typography and digital imagery. These collages
Viktor,
yeah.
Just one thing, Vic. Try to go full screen.
He meant full screen, Viktor.
And I will find my full screen in view, enter
right
full screen.
Perfect.
As it says. So so this is a magazine, a modern magazine on mythology, and that was actually my first time experimenting with collaging. Everything is done by hand, photocopied on pieces of acetate, and then painted underneath with acrylics. This follows exactly the same technique. It's my first piece at the New York Times. I gave to the art director of the op-ed page, Mirko Illich, my thesis project. He chose something and it was published. I didn't know exactly what they're going to publish. So the next morning I found out with everyone else. And then I started doing a lot of editorial. This is newspaper covers. From newspaper spots, I went to covers, magazine covers, a good gamut of American and international ones as well. Then went into book covers, did a lot of work with Penguin, but also Rizzoli and other European brands of publishing, and eventually posters. So all of these things are going at the same time, and they're still going as well. We moved into key art for larger cultural festivals, for example, Photoville, you know well what that is, for the last 11 years. And some also large projects like the mural at the Cultural Center of the Stavros Niarchos Foundation in Athens, at the lobby of the Greek National Library, where the first cup, Marathon Cup, is housed, and it was a photo collaged mural for it. One thing leads to another is something that I like to say, especially to my students, where you do something, and if you do it passionately, it leads to other things. And 1999, we were all afraid of the millennium bug. So I created the opposition to it, and Plug was actually an inspiration bug. I showed it to the comics magazine in Athens. They took me in a cab to a gallery that you see on top there, and they asked me if I can fill up that space with these strange bugs. I said yes. I had 6 months to do it, and this was the beginning of a great adventure. It led into an entire series of transmigrational bugs that filled up eventually museums and galleries. These were very big, kind of almost like real size canvas prints.
Viktor, let me just ask you, as you work in these different mediums, is there something, I mean, how much different is it to do a book cover, to a magazine cover, to a newspaper article, to a gallery show? I mean, is there something you prefer about it, or do you just love the different mediums themselves?
Well, the commissions are, of course, restricted to their prompts and a lot of layers of people saying yes or giving you corrections. The fine art stuff is completely up to you. As long as you make it and you successfully put it in a space, no one asks you any more questions. So this is where you actually, as funny as it sounds, you can let your hair down. So this is the big difference between the two. One makes money, and one costs money. So eventually, I see my my clients almost like the sponsors for my fine art work. Plug becomes a graphic novel in 2004, and also spawns some licensing for skateboards and snowboards in Europe. Actually, Fun for You is based in Germany. And then we moved to another fine art collection that is called the Damsels in Armor. So it's a series of war memorials, anti-war pieces, and reminders of what war really means. So from galleries to museums, I was lucky enough to get Umberto Eco to write an essay for the introduction of the book. Some jewelry inspired by it, limited editions that are sold to galleries based on that helmet. And this is a sterling silver belt buckle, a very interesting dimensional project. And then, inspired by an old Village Voice cover, remember the Village Voice, RIP, spawned my next series of alphabets. I'm obsessed with making visual alphabets, theme-oriented letter forms. And inspired by the Damsels in Armor, I had a lot of leftovers, a lot of elements that I photographed that I didn't do anything with. And eventually, they developed into a full alphabet. So these alphabets always find their ways. It was exhibited in Photoville in 2011, all the way to Athens in a very different ways. You actually see the exact same prints and how they can be installed into very different environments, all the way to the cover of the best Scottish poetry anthology, The Druth. So it was exhibited in London, and the people from Druth saw it there and asked if they could license it for their cover. My next series is Vanity Studies, and it was pretty much a still life series that was requested by the Photography Museum in Greece for a specific festival. It exhibited in Europe, it exhibited here, from Michigan all the way to California. It came with its own catalog. I like packaging my series in catalogs. They create a record, they create a convenient way to promote the work. You meet someone, you hand them a catalog, it really elevates the work into a different level. Some licensing to phone covers, all the way to record covers and the art behind bands and performing, but as well as licensing, because this is one of the main ways that bands make their living now. It's their merchandising and not the actual music.
Viktor, can you give us a little sense of what inspires you? How an idea gets created and how you go with it. Can you shed a little skin on that?
Absolutely. Actually, I will be speaking with original sketches for the new series,
Okay.
so you will get to see exactly that. And I hope people, I'm glad that you're mentioning it. I hope people will find it interesting as well. Tired of the darkness, I created a series on toys. It has a lot to do from the break I need from one series to the other. The photography that I have actually photographed, because it takes a lot of images to actually source all the details in those pieces. The exhibitions that came with the toys all the way to the fence as public art, an MTA project, and one of those cool bags that you make out of the material from the fence. So thankfully the material was not thrown out, and it was developed into bags that were sold for charity. Of course, the toys come on with their own alphabet that gets exhibited, from medieval castles on top in Nicosia, Cyprus, all the way to the Type Directors Club. So it gets a mixture of attention from very specific places like the Type Directors Club that has everything to do with typefaces, all the way to festivals. I collaborated with a friend and we developed a limited edition book that was sold at the New York City Comic-Con in 2009. And on top is little frames that were exhibited in my gallery in London. And that leads to the series right before the last one, where I just wanted to make monsters. And there's no better place to find them than mythology. And because I've studied Greek mythology as a child, a very clinical and clean version of Greek mythology, when there is very few books are so full of sex and violence in the original version, that I thought I have to restudy mythological creatures. I took some that we all know very well, but I was also attracted to some monsters that very few people know about, and I was glad to discover. Collaborated with an anthology editor, Ellen Dutlow. She commissioned 24 different writers to write one piece about a specific monster. So we have a series of fiction writers paired with a series of monsters, and that was this edition. Some of the work was produced as limited edition 50 by 70. That is a fairly standard size for Europe. They were an edition of 3, but I also created a unique series of tintypes. So there were just unique prints. I collaborated with a specialist. And right next door, you see a piece that was directly inspired. Actually, I was working on one piece, and then I was asked for a steampunk horseman. So the Immortality Engine got someone of a version of an original tintype. Exhibited again from United Photo Industries in Brooklyn to my gallery in London, Athens, and my gallery here in New York in very different ways and sizes. And then we go, of course, to the alphabet, and this is pretty much the appetizer to the main course today. The having done a lot of steampunk, it's a kind of literature where everything moves through steam. In Victorian England, I created an alphabet, and here we have a character called the Plague Doctor, and it's a very traditional, very well known kind of a character. This project started before the pandemic, and all of a sudden it became very, very real. So any joke I would used to make about this character just like seized as soon as you figure out what a pandemic is in your own lifetime. Full alphabet for the pandemic series, and it's called Steampunkphabet. Exhibits, Type Directors Club, and elsewhere, a series of utopian book covers, actually dystopian book covers in Greece, were based on the series. So an art director sees your work in a very different place, and they're really attracted to it and think they want to do something with it. And this is where, Frank, the borders between fine art and commercial art get completely blurred, because often whatever you do for yourself ends up fulfilling the needs for someone else, and they ask to license the work and actually use it. And then we go to the series itself. Greetings from Pandemic Island, art therapy in the time of disruption. In the beginning of the pandemic, I found myself ending my emails to people, especially outside of the island of Manhattan, by writing greetings from Pandemic Island. And these were really the dark days of the pandemic, where we all felt we kind of have to do something about it. It was a time where where a lot of us also didn't have something to do, because other than teaching, the illustration industry imploded, at least for a few months, with closed bookstores and kiosks and all of that. So there was practically very little to do. So I took my plague doctor, put him into a full environment, used archival imagery, and I created a new version of Plague Doctor. This was published in Bean Magazine in 2021. And then I started making images that were mostly sketches that I've done in a while, because I thought, I have the time, why don't I make them? And they're you know, ugly images and fairly painful, and they seem not to have a reason, but they inspired me to do, slowly but surely, things that would have a direct relation to what we were going through, the experience of Manhattan Island during the ongoing pandemic. And this is a poster that was supposed to tell people to breathe. I very much experimented with it. You see the way I sketch things before I compose it, come up with ideas. Usually during the weekend, I will sit down with my sketchbook and put some ideas down. Things started becoming a little more specific. This addresses the issue between butterflies and the cause of the pandemic. I shoot a good deal at the Museum of Natural History, and I collect images, and this is the combination of the butterfly and the bat, and becomes the butterfly.
Viktor, from a sketch to a finished piece, how long is that process for you, or does it vary from project to project?
It very much, and that a lot of that depends on the sourcing of the imagery. Sometimes you get inspired by an image that you find, that you run into, or a sketch you really want to actualize, and then you go out and you start photographing things. During the pandemic, I counted a lot on imagery that I already had. Museums were closed, places that I can photograph were closed, a minimal amount of stock, and a lot of research archival imagery. But each piece has a solid 15 to 20 hours of work, of cleaning, combining. Some of them are still torturing me. Some of them are not done. And I guess 2 years from now, I will figure out what the exact solution is when I take a photograph that is the solution to what I did. So I started developing creatures that are growing up in the Hudson River because of the pandemic. But no matter what you do to a fish, it kind of looks funny. So I didn't want anything funny about this series. And then I started coming up with ideas, and this might look funny as well, where we blow a huge glove and we release it in the air as something that would be a cry for help. So you combine this kind of old image with a very new kind of a balloon that has a lot to do with what we're going through. And then everything starts with a fever, and you start researching old thermometers, because I wanted the series to actually be a connection between the two pandemics. One is the Spanish flu in 1918, and then 100 years later, COVID. So they're exactly 100 years apart. And then I wanted this series to kind of bridge. So there's an archival quality, but sometimes you get a very contemporary concept, or something very specifically related to the island of Manhattan as an experience. So struggling with thermometers, old thermometers don't really even look like thermometers. So I had to use a kind of like a newer one. You see the sketch that I want, a broken thermometer that actually opens and flows its liquid. I make little notes, because my sketches are so bad, I might not even recognize what they mean a little later, but I wanted something that shows what happens inside of you when COVID takes root. I like doing things with X-rays. This was an early sketch of a skeletal hand pulling a snake, but I thought it was a little too much on the nose, and I went for something just a little more general. Also, the human aspect became very important. Simple things as the fact that we thought we had a cold, but it's not just a cold, and you blow on your handkerchief, and very different things happen. It starts with a very, very simple sketch or something you want to say. Just something you want to say translates to a very simple drawing, and then you start putting it together. I wanted to do something with the lack of taste and the lack of smell, so I even have fish flavored ice cream. I started thinking of things that make absolutely no sense, but I thought that the fact that salt doesn't even matter anymore could be very eloquently saying this in a very symbolic way. So we have a good amount of still lifes, but also figurative pieces, things that are very much rooted to the human aspect, the expressions on the face, or figures that do something. Again, this is a very accurate kind of I was looking for a shovel for like 2 weeks, for the right shovel to use here, and what exactly the posture would be from two ex-military people looking at a giant map. A heat map of Manhattan. I fell in love with these beautiful color charts of energy, and I thought we never had something like this that is very modern, but in juxtaposition with a very vintage map. The eyes are something that I like to do almost in every series. It's the eye that opens, and the realization that we have a pandemic going, pretty close to the sketch too. I also had this photograph with bubbles, and I wanted to do something about it, and it seems like the eye came to my rescue. I wanted to do something about the how blind our leadership was, and the exact wrong way of using a glove, and it took 3 takes until I got to something that I was happy with, and the sketches are on the side as well for you to see. The bubble and people living in the bubble, or people being able to afford a bubble, because a big part of the series became how different socioeconomic stratas of people were experiencing the pandemic, because there were these 2 or 3 or 5 experiences according to your tax bracket, were very, very different as experience. Death takes root. I was given plans by my wife, but they did not last long, as you can see, but nevertheless they inspired me to mix them in the art, and I wanted to do something with these roots. Digging mass graves. A lot of this experience was informed by the experience that my wife went through as a person that works with a hospital and had to cross every day to go to her lab. She manages biology labs in a large hospital, and she had to go through the cooling containers housing the bodies, because they were not being able to absorb fast enough in New York. So this was pretty much our information from the outside world, while me and my children kind of hid in our apartment and studied or taught.
Yeah, and Victor, do you when you do a project like this, are you collaborating or getting feedback from your wife, because it is something so close to what she's living with as well, or you're alone all the way?
I am alone, and I actually it makes sense, because I wanted an unadulterated kind of version of the things that were happening. Also, mostly I hide in my studio and make those things. So there's not there's a 20-step separation between home and studio, but it's like ages away one from the other. And this is a way to shelter them from the things I make, and also being able, for my sanity, to separate between the two, going up and down. Only 20 steps, as I said. This is another social piece about the way the affluent class pretty much experienced the pandemic, but also a very strong photograph. This is something that I shot many years ago, that really photogenic roach, and wanted to use it as the antithesis to this. The people fleeing the city to go to other places, or to go to their summer homes. For some reason, I wanted this character to have a very long scarf, but it did not end up to be that way. This complete leaving in a haste, like a chair being turned over very simply, very plain, very direct kind of image. The testing, we're trying to test and find out what to do with it. I shot that frog at the Museum of Natural History a few years ago in the middle of a different project. The frog was shot already. I just want to say this. I had nothing to do with the demise of it. It's just a specimen on the second floor of the children's section at the museum. I was inspired by all of this, pretty much infographics about the way the pandemic and the virus is transmitted. So I sketched and found the ways and actually diagrams to portray that. I wanted some of the images to really hit to the stomach and show people the intensity of death and strange kind of carnage that was happening here. The lockdown, this is simply a photograph of a new lock I had to change in the studio during the pandemic when the guy came in, took my old lock from the 80s, and I just loved what it looked like, and it became kind of perfect as a not only a mandatory lockdown, and thankfully we didn't have too many of them in New York, but a mental lockdown that we're still kind of going through, either we want it or not. The lack of touch between people became this very plain kind of configuration. I was inspired by the images of people saying goodbye to people in hospitals or old age homes, people living on the ventilators and struggling with it. Again, science and the testing that was going on was very inspiring. I also do a lot of science magazine covers, so I had a good collection of pieces. The ladder and how difficult it is to go up and get what everyone else is getting. A variation of the Big Apple became central to the things I wanted to say. Infographics, again, are everything became about percentages and how many people died today and what's that kind of a percentage and all of the statistics. 6 feet away, again, that infographic language that we became so accustomed to. Endless lists of the dead. Message in a bottle, Manhattan calling for help. The subway experience. The lost summer, very simply a plate I still haven't been forgiven for breaking for an illustration and a shell. I wanted to do something about traveling or not traveling, and that seemed to do the trick. I took the stairs from an illustration I did a while ago. The loss of employment by many people that we knew so well and so often. The desertion of any kind of public entertainment, people being isolated at home. The experience of the artist. Reading becomes popular again. The medical situations, I got fascinated with buttons, but I did not have a conceptual hook to introduce them, and the buttons became pills. What the pandemic has done to the children. I call this girl Interrupted. Again, people self-medicating with alcohol or any way they could find. Isolation is a big part of what I've been talking about and what I wanted to express. A World War II almost image. I know my grandmother was making socks for the people in the front fighting, and I thought that maybe people can do that with gas masks. Signage, again, experimenting, way more elaborate kinds of microscopes that filter down to something fairly simple. The virus itself, this is of course a strange kernel that you find in the streets of Manhattan that looks all of a sudden so evil. the influence on children again, and the way the virus is used, isolation of children, singular seesaw configurations. These are drawings of my kids that I combine into one drawing. Isolation again, and gasping for air, and the outdoors. Doors that tell many stories of many people, but they're closed. Something very, very simple as scratches on the wall and counting the passage of time. The psychological toll. A very simple act that you would buy something for someone that couldn't go out and do it. So I just came with a bag from downstairs, photographed it, and then made it fit to the era. Looking down also as a sign of isolation.
And Viktor, how long does this take you? Like this whole body of work?
The body of yes, I can give you exactly a count. It's a series of 160 images, and it took a good part of a year and a half, and maybe a little more.
But there must be a period of time where you're just rocking it. I mean, like you're in a
yes,
zone.
For more than a year was a daily
Really?
A daily undertaking. Photographing, collecting, sketching, photographing, collecting, sketching. Things would happen. I would need to put some things, fake news, whatever was happening, I would just jot it down, make a sketch, and then go for it for things that were there or things that were missing.
Yeah, and Viktor, can you give us a sense what that feels like when you're in somewhat of a zone where it's pouring out of you?
I never thought I had this series in me. I think it might be the first time that I experienced almost like a pure kind of fine art sentiment of having something so heavy inside me and wanting to get it out. It's as simple as that. And it gets obsessive. It gets definitely obsessive. And we go to almost the resolution monuments to the vaccine, the anti-vax movement, people still dying in hospitals, Delta and Omicron in one. I started doing things on Delta, and then all of a sudden you have Omicron. So you got reality actually chasing behind you, commemorating people that have left. That piece became part of an exhibition at the Jewish Museum in Athens that I had the opportunity to curate, combining also ancient stone. So it's sitting right next to a 2,400-year-old stone, and that's a thrill. And this is a little bit, just a couple of slides about the process of putting everything up, choosing with the help of Stella Kramer, just sitting down the good old-fashioned way, yellow stickies on them, what goes in, what goes out, and then working on sequencing them. This is the premiere exhibition that just happened this summer at the Vanity Museum in Athens. And you can see that very much the way we organized them inspired the way they were exhibited in small acrylic prints, and also a projection room of a slideshow. And because of the length of the series, we had the luxury of having 40 pieces on the outside and 40 pieces on the inside. And we could have another 2 exhibitions like these when you have a large number of pieces. And this is it. I know I went above and beyond what was alluded to me. I hope that Claire will forgive me. This is it for me. I will stop sharing. Thank you for your patience.
No, Viktor, everybody in the chat room is just blown away by all that. And I remember now it was Stella who introduced us. And she's the greatest. So give us a little sense of the editing process with Stella. How did that work?
Look, when you're so obsessive about an image, you're like up to here. It's too close for you to see it. So when we put work up, very wisely, Stella said, I want to identify pieces that say the same thing twice and start paring these down. And then you come into a much tighter group. And then you start sequencing where where it becomes almost a visual story, but not a chronological story. So this was a lot of the issues that we discussed about the flow of the imagery and how other people that know nothing about the subject will experience it, and Stella was very good at keeping me within that frame of mind. Think of the people that know nothing about this and will experience it for the first time. So a really experienced pair of eyes is it's an amazing thing to have on your side when you're looking at 160 pieces.
Right. That's beautiful. And if any, I mean, you'll see in the chat room there, Viktor, everyone is just amazed by the work. And I can't thank you enough for sharing that. And
Thank you.
If there's any other questions, we'll get back to you.
I'll be here. Thank you.
Great. So thank you very much for doing that. Let's
Frank, I have a quick thing.
Yeah.
Viktor, can you talk about your inspiration?
Inspirations are various. I'm inspired by my mentors. I'm inspired by painting, and the painting that inspired my mentor. So Marshall Arisman is a very big influence. He's a legendary illustrator that just passed a few months ago. But then also a lot of classical work. I got to collaborate with H.R. Giger. So a lot of these people have become my my inspiration. A lot of it through their work ethic. So,
Thank you.
You say that with a gun in your eye, work ethic. Give us the message behind that, Viktor.
Look, the work of doing the work is what makes the work. Nothing else. We can talk endlessly about it, but until you go to the studio at 5:30 in the morning and start the good work, it's never going to happen. And some days you do a lot of work with no results, and then the next day everything is resolved. So it's the highest highs and lowest lows as long as you keep at it. So I think work ethic is one of the biggest issues that people will find in front of them, and there are ways of getting better at it.
There you go. The work is the work is the work. There you go. Never said clearer than that. Thank you, Viktor. All right, let's get Claire to Claire Perry to share her screen.
Sure. Thanks, Viktor. That was really wonderful.
Thank you, Claire.
Okay. All right, is this all good for everybody?
That's great, Claire.
Okay, so it's nice of all to see everybody here. My name is Claire. I'm currently living in New York. And yeah, just working in New York as a photographer and real estate photographer. And I do all of my own freelance and do my own creative work on the side and projects like that. So I have a couple of projects to show you today. One of them being called Sunburn Curtains. And it's work that I've done with a large scale camera obscura. I'm sure you guys, some of you may be familiar with the camera obscura. It dates as early back as 400 BC, and the first handheld is like the late 1600s. So basically what I decided to do was create large scale camera obscuras in my home. Some of you may be familiar with this artist, Abelardo Morel. He was definitely a influence in this project. And that's a photo of looking over Central Park. So this is just like a little project description. I'll just read this to you quickly. During the peak of lockdown 2020, I became fascinated with the camera obscura and its capacity to superimpose one reality upon another, allowing the viewer to be in two places simultaneously. Secluded in my family's home, I covered up a large window of my bedroom with black cardboard and carved a hole into it, enabling the landscape outside to burn its way in. Adjusting slowly, my eyes began to follow any glimmer of luminosity on my walls, and the room started to glow with a moving image. The camera obscura has been used as a tool by artists throughout history to make the exterior world a stencil for their images. Projecting itself, the landscape plays a direct role in creating the artwork. I experience the rooms differently now that they've become cameras. Through trial and error, I've explored ways of capturing images of the outside world as they hover inside, in harmony or in contrast within domestic spaces. In the series Sunburn Curtains, I've transformed multiple rooms in my family home to create psychological and suspenseful narratives inside whimsical environments that complicate visual perception and to stir the viewer's imagination. So that's a little bit of a start to that. A lot of this work was through trial and error, super experimental. And all these rooms were like very large scale. So it was either a matter of playing of where the whole of all the light would travel through, like where that would be on the window and stuff like that. So a lot of the time I was, again, through trial and error and kind of living in these spaces and just kind of absorbing what it feels like to live inside a camera. Yeah.
And Claire, when do you know that you have a good idea? When did this, like sort of say, wow, this is something special?
Well, I think it also had to just do with the time period. I mean, this was kind of the peak of lockdown and I wasn't living in New York. I kind of flew to live with my family in Florida at the time. And so I had a project that I already started and I kind of put that on pause and just started this new project. And I love the concept of, during that time, like the desire to be outside and kind of like, imagining what life is like, now that you're living inside and kind of the lapse of time with that. And honestly, it was mostly just experimental and kind of turned into this like ongoing series. But yeah, any like objects inside the room, anything that could be, within harmony and contrast to kind of almost enter into a different reality. And then I started to come in and play with portraiture and add in the human element into these images.
Wow.
It was kind of a playful dance between me and the camera, my family members, and like kind of how it just moved onto the walls.
And is
And
this
sometimes-
ongoing now, Claire?
Right now it's not, because since these were such large scale rooms, I haven't had the chance again to build them. It was very, it was a full production almost. So as of now, I would love to revisit this project and kind of dive back into it when I have more time on my hands. And I'm actually very grateful for the time I had during the peak of lockdown, just to really sit and kind of, manifest this different unworldly kind of place and created something different. And I kind of made the choice to either flip the image, because when you look at a camera obscura, the projection of the light is always going to be upside down. So even when we see, like when you see something day to day, your eye actually sees it like flipped, and then your brain kind of gathers all the information and flips it upside right for you, so that we can balance things naturally. So I thought that was interesting too, because it was kind of entering to the brain of the camera and seeing what it's like to live inside a camera and deciding whether to flip images or keep them as they are. As you can see, this is an image that has been flipped, and kind of that like shell hanging at the top, kind of to play with like the gravity and the visual perception that you can see. And that's the last image there. Any questions?
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, but haven't. And how do you know when you're done?
When I'm done with the image, it was all like,
Yeah, done with the image, done with the project.
yeah. So I think the project, it was kind of on a time sensitive stamp. I only had like 4 months to really just dive into this project. And then once I had to leave and go back to New York, it kind of just stopped. But in terms of the imagery, it was again trial and error and kind of playing around and seeing what worked. Like I never had like a set time of, okay, this exposure is going to be 3 minutes. It was very just like playing with it and kind of deciding when to open and close the shutter. So again, it was like kind of this dance between me and the camera and very like performative.
Yeah, and how long did it take to set up, these images?
So some of the rooms that I was in, they were like really large scale sliding doors. So I had to take tons and tons of black cardboard and kind of paste it onto those walls. So it wasn't just a small window. A lot of them were doors or anything like that. So it would take a couple hours to really close up and make the rooms into this dark room.
Mm-hmm. Great. Okay.
Then we can move on to the next kind of series. This
Okay.
underwater photography has kind of always been something that, I've loved. I was a sailor in college. I always loved the water. So this is just an ongoing project, I think, for the rest of my life. Like I will always be doing underwater photography and kind of then I could see myself later down the line putting all the work that I've done in underwater photography to like a one cohesive, like lifelong project. But a little bit about if this is
Wait,
just
just Claire, someone
Sure.
had a good question.
Sure.
Are you actually in the room when the exposure is occurring on the first
Yes.
series? Great
Yes.
question, Eduardo.
Yeah. So I'm kind of sitting in the room, kind of hiding away. So I'm not creating any shadows or anything like that. But yes, I'm sitting in the room while the exposure is happening. I never leave. I can go back to this first image here. This image is actually an image of myself. So I took this picture, clicked the shutter, ran to this door that actually led to a bathroom and kind of opened it a little bit and then closed it and ran back and clicked the shutter again. So that's why you can see the body is a little bit transparent, kind of a ghostly figure. So that's just me moving into different places.
Okay. Sorry to interrupt you, but that was just a good question.
No, yeah, of course. Let's see. Okay, so yeah, back to the water,
Okay.
underwater series. So this is just a little text that, I wrote. It's a little bit poetic. It's not necessarily like, you know, a set in stone text about the work, but I'll just go ahead and read that quickly. I've always been drawn to the beauty of water and how water and humanity are interconnected. Water is an essential part of our lives and all living things. More than 60% of our bodies is made up of water. Water moves throughout our bodies like the ebb and flow of an ocean, tides, and currents. It's not until we are born that we first breathe oxygen. Until then, we live in our mother's womb, submerged in a sea of atomic fluid. The oceans, like our subconscious mind, only 5% of the oceans have been explored. Beneath them lies mysteries unknown, all-encompassing, life-giving, beautiful, and powerful, with the potential to destroy an ocean and humanity are alike. As humans, we rely on water for life, but water does not rely on us. So these are some of the images here. And again, I would say, like, for myself, I'm very much an experimental photographer. So a lot of these images are happy mistakes, or an image that was a happy mistake, then I could try to recreate it to just improve it in general.
And what body of water? Where are you?
So these are kind of all over the place. Some are in South Carolina, some in Florida, some in Greece. For example, this was in Greece.
And do you get different inspirations from the different locations? You know, like where
Yeah, I
you
mean,
were mentally, I
right.
mean, different
Each location is
different
different for sure.
than Florida.
I think some locations are more challenging than others, depending on like how you're able to see within, within the water. Like in Florida, it's, you can get some pretty murky water or you can get really clear days. So it's kind of depends on that. I try to always shoot when it's the clearest so I can get the best imagery. This is one of my first images that I did with underwater photography, and it's still one of my favorites.
Very cool.
Yeah, so that's, kind of a little bit of the underwater series. I do have one more project I
Here's
can
a
share
question.
if we have time, but I want to get to any
Yeah,
questions
yeah.
people have or let's
Are
see.
you working with models or are these self-portraits?
These are friends and families of mine, so they're not models. I've actually not used any models in the underwater series and or the camera obscura series. And that's not by choice, it's more so just convenience and being close to people and having friends that are willing to kind of be the subject matter. But I have
And
worked with models in the past and they're definitely easier to work with, but there's this idea of a relationship that I have that I'm close to somebody that I like to shoot. There's just a more of an intimate moment there.
and are you making big prints? Are they on your website? You know, what do you do with the final images?
So these are all on my web. Most of them are on my website. Some of them are not. But yes, I do sell these prints. I haven't been able to have a show yet. I was going to have a show for the Camera Obscura series, but it was actually just recently. When it was supposed to happen, it was COVID, whatever. But recently, we just did a show at the International Center of Photography, and that was pretty great. But yeah, I mean, all these prints are for sale, and I like to get them blown up big. I love printing really big.
And is this series over for you, or this
No,
continues
this is
for
a
you?
series that will be like, I think for my whole life.
Okay.
Yeah, I always thought of the series as ongoing just because I don't want it to end kind of thing. And
Fair enough.
yeah, when I was in college, I did some a lot of underwater photography as well, and I made them into cyanotypes, which was really fun and experimental because it's like you're developing the photo with water and such. So, and then if there's not any other questions, I do have one more project I can share if we have time.
Yeah, let's see it.
It's
Yeah, no,
sure.
we have time.
So this is actually the series that I started right before the Camera Obscura series. That kind of got sidetracked. I'm still working on it now. But it's a series in the Flower District in New York. So this series actually kind of stemmed from a class that I was taking, and it was about the experience of a place. And so I ended up choosing the Flower District just because I found it fascinating and had never really seen anything like that outside of New York. And I just found it interesting that all these plants are kind of living in these like cramped and dark places that kind of almost represent, us as humans living in New York City in these tight spaces and all trying to live together. And almost taking portraits of these plants, like as if they're larger than life and making them the most important thing. Of all, like, as you can probably tell, a lot of my inspiration just comes from nature. Like that's where I thrive. I also just think the flower district is interesting because it's just one block, you turn the corner and you're entering into this different realm of like a different world almost. So I thought that was interesting. And it kind of just goes to show what we desire as consumers and, buying plants and living things for our homes to make it feel, that we're connected to the world and
One
to
thing you're doing, Claire,
nature.
one thing you're doing, Claire, you're making all the rest of us feel old. The flower district used to be, 7 or 8 blocks long from, 6th Avenue all the way to 7th. I mean, it was just,
Yeah,
it was huge. And now,
I
now
know. I wish it
it's
was still
like
was that big. That's interesting that you say that. Yeah. There's like this old map of flowers from 1995, it says on that little note from the city of New York.
What does the note say, Claire?
It's just it's I think I don't really know what it says, but it's just dated 1995. And so that poster is that old kind of thing.
And what gave you the inspiration and to do the flower district?
Well, again, like, being drawn to nature, it's always something that I go back to. And I just thought it was fascinating that there was an entire district just dedicated to plants and flowers. And, how does that represent, us as consumers? Why, in New York City of all places, I just thought that was an interesting play about what people desire to like have plants be connected to nature. And there's like this whole, area dedicated to that. And just like that last picture of them being imported from who knows where, like all around, kind of bringing life into New York.
And is that project over? Did you see any characters in the place that
Yeah, the project
be
is not
interesting?
over, but
Okay.
it was put on pause for a while, but it's definitely something I'm going back to. I've kind of decided to either, like, I did some portraits of people, owners of the shops, kind of got to know them a little bit. But I found it just more interesting to do like portraits of the plants and
Right.
kind of enter into their world. Like what are they seeing? Things like that.
Fun.
I thought about doing like a very, professional environmental photos of the store owners and stuff to make it super documentary, but I kind of liked a different route there. But yeah.
And hard to get access, or
Yeah, a little bit. I kind of find myself like sneaking around a little because they don't necessarily like they want to sell you something. They don't really want the store to be photographed. So, but
there's
some people
probably
are
100
super
violations. There's probably 100 violations in each one of these
friendly.
in each one of these stores that you've documented. I'm sure that electricity does. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, some people were super friendly and some weren't not so friendly. So it was definitely kind of it depends on someone's mood.
Right, and the day and how many sales they've had. So we could open up. Anyone has any questions for Claire or Victor? Fire away. But that was another terrific presentation, Claire. That was really wonderful. Great for sharing.
Thank you
Love,
guys.
love.
I'm sorry. I do have a quick question. I
No,
have to
don't be sorry.
apologize
But
for coming in late. I have a drum class that overlaps with this session, but being a New Yorker, I don't really know where the flower district is. I know that my brother-in-law goes down early Saturday mornings to get flowers for his mother's church. So I knew that it was there, but I don't know exactly where it is. And I also want to know, do you photograph it in the winter months, and how different is it during the winter?
Um, it's so yeah, the flower district, it's like on 28th and
Six.
or
So
7th.
it's kind of like
No,
photo district area, kind of.
yeah,
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, so it starts on that 28th Street and kind of goes in between two avenues between 8th and 7th.
Okay,
Um,
gotcha. Okay,
6 and
yeah,
7.
that's
6 and
exactly.
7, yeah.
Yeah,
6 and
it
7.
it it, it's
Blocks
6
away from where I am right now, and a little history lesson. Before it was a flower district, that was the original Tin Pan Alley. And after fighting for it for 40 or 50 years, we finally got a sign put up about 10 months ago on the corner of 6th Avenue, 6th Avenue or Broadway and 28th that says Tin Pan Alley. Tin Pan Alley was where before they were recorded, if somebody wanted to sell their music, this was everybody was ever from.
Someone turn off the music?
Yeah, someone's got their music on.
Yeah.
Maybe
Thank you.
Jake.
Sorry, I didn't hear too much of what you said, but
Okay. Should I repeat?
Ellen has a question.
Okay.
Mrs. Rosenberg has a question.
Yeah, thank you. Victor, this is for you. With the intensity of your projects, and particularly the last one that you did based upon COVID, and COVID never really went away. So how did you know that you were done?
I was done maybe 4 times. I'm not done. I think I thought I'm done a few times. You at some point you have to move on. I also started having to exhibit the series. So I started having very physical, very real production deadlines. But I don't feel one of the last pieces, one of the 2 last pieces, I just worked on them last week and snuck them into the presentation. So I catch myself working on these, illegally working still on this series, unfortunately.
Can somebody turn this? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right. So then you were constantly, you're not done, which I suspect happens with some projects that take over in that. And when you're basing it upon something that's occurring within us or outside of us, when I think that's the biggest, most difficult thing to know when you're done.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Anyone else have any other questions?
I had a question for Victor. It's Karen Hirsch. Hello.
Hi, Karen.
Hi. First of all, I wanted to compliment you on your imagination and your work. It's beautiful. I was wondering, you were exhibiting in multiple locations, including Greece, and there are a lot of work that you're showing, which production would be pretty costly. I was wondering if you're underwriting this or if you're getting sponsors, and how are you getting into these exhibitions?
It's an excellent question. Thank you for your good words. My mother will be very glad to hear. The exhibitions work in many different ways. You will find photo festivals that will actually produce the work. So you don't even go there. You don't have to ship anything. All the way to bringing in my suitcases IKEA frames to my gallery in London. So I do the framing there. So I ordered glass in London. It was the only thing I could afford. And then I brought in IKEA frames and ordered the glass to that size. And I spent 3 days in the gallery actually framing the stuff myself.
Wow.
But thankfully, digital printing helps a lot. Finding a few printers. I mean, I have a very good collaboration in Athens where I trust the people that are actually editioning that stuff, and I also have people to overlook and check and price them. So I do that. Also, production is much cheaper there. And then you also have the New York City experiences where everything is expensive and the guy at the frame shop takes you for a ride, but you have no choice. Also, being lucky enough to be the chair of the illustration and comics departments at the School of Visual Arts, I can get some of the printing done on premises. So it's really an ongoing mix and match. But when you get enough of this exhibition under your belt, some of them unfortunately are not worth it. You're like, okay, and then it's going to consume me for 2 months between production and shipping and quality and having to be there. Because if you're not there, let's not fool ourselves, you're the best ambassador for your work. It also presents you with a very different situation between commercial galleries and non-for-profit spaces, where you have to be there for the gallery that trusts your work and has to make their rent, where you have to push as hard as you can, to festivals that many times happen exactly at the same time, and you got to work at home. Also, having commercial clients or having a steady job allows you the luxury of spend a little more on production and not to think 6 times on it, only 5 times about it. So it's a big mix and match, but you grow up very fast, and then you start narrowing your targets. You start focusing on things that will do something solid for your work and that will create enough interest. I mean, this presentation for me was a very important presentation. I spend a good part of a week putting this thing together, and I would catch myself. I'm like, why are you being like this? And then I'm like, I couldn't have it any other way. I wanted to present a good product. It takes a long time to collect sketches and scan them and sign them and clean them and match them and find some of the photography. But you start economizing in your time, your resources, and your energy. But thankfully, there are a lot of things that are worth it. Also, new relationships are more costly, but I also feel advance you and push you forward.
Thanks.
You ask, Karen. That's a great answer. I mean, it really gives you the whole gamut there. Sandy, you had a question.
Yeah, Claire, I
Yes.
wanted to ask, first of all, your presentation was beautiful, and Victor, so was yours. Just amazing work. Um,
Thank
I'm a
you.
New Yorker, and I've never been to the Flower District in my life. Is it all like your photographs seem to suggest that they're in stores? Is there anything on the streets that you can photograph when
Yeah.
you're in the area, or everything is enclosed?
So no, it in the summer months and fall and spring when it's warm enough to kind of have those plants outside, you kind of can get there and turn the corner and you just like enter into this like brush of greenery. So yes, they are pretty much everywhere on the streets and inside. And so again, it's kind of entering into that different world right in this middle of the city, almost like a botanical garden, some would say. But yeah, you should definitely go check it out. It's quite
Yeah.
the sight.
Someone should do a mitzvah. Someone should do a mitzvah. Connect with Sandy and just stroll to the flower district. And if no one does it before October, when I'm going to be in the city, I'll do it with Sandy.
Thank you.
I'll go with the 3 of you. How about that?
There you go. I'll buy the coffees or the beers or whatever needs to be my pleasure. Be my pleasure. Any other comments, questions from anybody? Yeah, Joel has a question. Unmute yourself, Joel.
Hello, Joel.
Can someone
one.
just unmute him? I think
Okay, thank you, thank
Oh,
you.
there you go.
Yeah, I was just wondering for Victor, are there any publications or books of yours or websites where we can see more of your work at will?
Yes, ViktorKoen.com, Viktor.
We'll put that in the chat room. Jay will put that in.
Okay, great.
in the
No,
chat.
I really was just amazed at the range of imagination. It reminded me.
Thank you.
It reminded me of a savory H.R. Giger instead of an unsavory H.R. Giger.
I had the opportunity to work with him.
Really?
We were represented by the same agent, so we got to collaborate in a few projects, and I got to meet him and work with him personally. So it was a great experience. He was a very beautiful and quiet man that did more than he spoke. So that was an amazing experience. As this is also the first time that I have a special website for the series, greetings from pandemicisland.com. So that is also something that I will be testing. I never had a project specific website. So it remains to be seen. I will report back to the base when I find out how functional and helpful that was.
Yeah, and Victor, do you, as you've created, same thing, Claire. As you're creating, do you think posters? Do you think greeting cards? Do you think books? Like, when does that start to sort of enter into your mind? This would be a great book. This would be a great show.
Yeah, I feel like Victor and my work is very different. Like for me, I don't really think about that. And I'm usually just making big prints. Like if I wanted to print on like canvas, that's kind of as far as I would go, or do kind of alternative techniques in the dark room, whether that be cyanotypes or printing on different types of paper, kind of playing with that. But nothing in the realm of like postcards or posters, really. I feel like that's definitely more of a youth thing, Victor.
You're right. The Greetings from Pandemic Island was actually thought as a series of postcards from Manhattan to the outside world to tell them what's going on. So there is definitely a postcard in the cards of this series. But I think the first step after, the first exhibitions, a book would be the next step, because I feel that will be a good record of this. We'll limit it to 100 pieces to kind of go with 100 years between the two pandemics, and take it from there. This already will make it like an over 200-page book. So it should be a book and not a brick. So I will limit to 100 images and take it from there.
And when that book comes out, we need you to come here and showcase it for us. So that's a standing invitation. But, William has a question.
Yeah, I have a question for Claire. Is there any relationship between the work that you've been doing and what you do commercially, your real estate photography, being that they're both, at least two of the projects, dealt with space and how one interacts in that space and on and on?
Yeah, I think I've always had a strong suit for landscapes, and just interiors in general. So yes, my commercial kind of rigid work definitely they are interchangeable when I do my more artistic work, I should say. But yeah, you can definitely see some elements of overlap there for sure. And in some cases, the rigid real estate photography can also help me in my artwork as well, just to make sure everything's like composed correctly and just being hyper aware of the surrounding of the subject matter of the area. So yeah, they definitely can help each other out in a sense.
Thank you.
Perfect. So just a couple of things before we shut the lights. I ask everyone to subscribe to our YouTube page. If you get a moment to do that, that would be great. It's Projections NYC. Also, in 2 weeks, we're doing another coverage of the Ukrainian war on the 9th. So we'll have 4 or 5, maybe 5 or 6 journalists over the course of the week on, in Ukraine presenting for us. So that, if you'll get a notice. If we don't have your email, send me one and we'll put you on our list. I cannot thank Viktor and Claire enough for coming in and doing this. This is really inspiring work, different work than we usually see. Very creative and very inspirational in so many ways. So I thank you both, and you both have a standing invitation when you have new work and you want to show. We'd love to have you back. That was really, really great work. So, but as I like to do it, we'll let Claire go first. You have a closing comment, then the big man, we'll have him close us out.
Well, no, I just, I don't really have anything crazy to say, but thank you so much for having me. And thanks for everyone for being attentive during the presentation and all of your nice comments. It's been a pleasure to, meet you all today. So thanks.
Thank you for coming.
Great. Great.
Thank you for presenting.
And Viktor.
I would actually like to thank for this community feeling that took place here. It's great to see your faces and know that I'm not speaking to blank screens, and I appreciate the comments. It's something that we have missed for too long, and I really thank you, Frank, for this platform, and thank you, Jay, for your help. It's very important. It's substance that we all need to push forward with work within and without. Thank you so much.
It's all too rare, and we really owe it to Frank for pursuing this and following it up for years. And I want to personally thank him again.
That's very, very nice. So we
Beautiful institution.
Well, it's,
even without
always,
the pizza. Even without the pizza.
It's always easy to give back, and you have to give back all the time. So that's all I got. So